Sir, you can't just stay here. Everyone else has deplaned. What's wrong with your ticket? The plane sat silent with only one passenger left on board. Crew whispered something was wrong with his ticket, and tension filled the empty cabin fast. But the single dad didn't argue. He calmly watched everything around him. Minutes later, the same crew would depend on him to avoid disaster. This story reveals how quiet skill outshines status when everything fails. Before I show you the exact moment when a grounded aircraft nearly turned into a fire hazard with no one able to stop it, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even stand up right away, just looked at her, then at the overhead panel flickering faintly above. Ethan Cole finally rose from his seat, slow and steady, like someone who wasn't in a rush to prove anything. His jacket was worn, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs, and the faint smell of engine grease clung to him, out of place among polished uniforms and spotless interiors. "Ticket's valid," he said quietly, holding it out. "Same as when I boarded." Marina Voss didn't take it immediately. Her eyes lingered on him instead. The scuffed shoes, the tired posture, the way he carried himself like someone used to being overlooked. Senior flight attendant, years of experience, instincts sharpened by routine. And right now, those instincts told her something didn't fit. The cabin around them had already emptied. Overhead bins stood open like abandoned lockers. The soft hum of idle systems filled the silence, broken only by the distant echo of footsteps as the last crew members moved through their shutdown checks. Outside, the runway lights glowed through the oval windows, casting long reflections across polished surfaces. "You were supposed to transfer," she said, tone tightening. "This aircraft is no longer in service for passengers." Ethan glanced briefly toward the cockpit door, slightly ajar, where muted voices carried hints of frustration. Then, back at her. "I was told to wait," he replied. "Next flight's delayed." Said I could stay on board until they sorted it. A pause. Not long, but enough for judgment to settle in the space between them. Marina exhaled sharply. "That's not standard procedure." He gave a small nod like he expected that answer. "Yeah," he said. "Seems like a lot of things tonight aren't." She didn't like that. Not the words, those were harmless enough, but the calm behind them. No defensiveness, no apology. Just observation. Behind her, another crew member passed by, whispering something about a delay on ground clearance. Marina barely acknowledged it. Her focus stayed fixed. "Sir," she continued, voice firm, "I'll need you to step off the aircraft. We'll sort your situation at the gate." Ethan didn't move. Not out of defiance, not stubbornness, something else. His gaze drifted again, this time longer, toward the ceiling panels. A faint flicker, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Then toward the sidewall, where a subtle vibration ran through the structure, like something humming just beneath control. "You hear that?" he asked. Marina frowned. "Hear what?" He tilted his head slightly, listening. The hum shifted, just a fraction higher, uneven now. "That's not normal," he murmured. Her patience thinned. "Sir, I need you to." "Power cycle didn't complete clean," he said, almost to himself. "Something's still drawing." She blinked, caught off guard, not by the words but by the certainty in them. "You're not authorized to assess aircraft systems," she snapped. Ethan finally looked directly at her again. Not challenging, not pleading, just steady. "Didn't say I was," he replied, "just saying something's off." From the cockpit, a sharper voice cut through. "Marina, hold a second." Both turned. Captain Renaud Hale stepped partially into view, headset hanging loose around his neck, expression tight. "We've got an auxiliary system refusing shutdown," he said. "Ground crew's checking it now." Marina straightened instantly, her authority shifting toward protocol. "Understood, Captain. I'm just clearing the last passenger." Renault's eyes flicked briefly to Ethan, then back. "Make it quick. We might be here a while." The cockpit door eased shut again, leaving the hum louder in the sudden quiet. Marina turned back, resolve firming again. "You heard him. Let's go." But Ethan didn't respond immediately. He was listening again. Not just hearing, processing. The rhythm, the inconsistency, the faint delay between fluctuations. His fingers twitched slightly at his side, like they remembered controls that weren't there. Then he exhaled. "Auxiliary bus isn't isolating," he said softly. Marina's expression hardened. "That's enough." He didn't argue. Just gave a small shrug, like someone stepping back from a line they already knew existed. "All right," he said. "I'll grab my bag." He reached up, pulling down a modest carry-on from the overhead bin. The movement was smooth, practiced. Inside, tucked between neatly folded clothes, a small photo peeked out. A young girl smiling wide, hospital bracelet barely visible on her wrist. For a moment, his hand lingered there. Then he zipped it shut. As he stepped into the aisle, the plane gave a faint shudder. Not violent. Not alarming. But enough. The hum spiked, just for a second before settling again into that uneven rhythm. Marina froze. Her eyes darted upward, then toward the cockpit door. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. He adjusted the strap on his bag, expression unreadable. "Still want me off?" he asked quietly. And this time, she didn't answer right away. Marina's hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough to shift something. "Yes," she said finally, though the firmness in her voice had thinned. "We'll handle whatever's going on. You need to deplane." Ethan gave a small nod like he'd expected that answer all along. No pushback. No argument. He stepped forward into the aisle, bag slung over his shoulder, moving toward the front with quiet, measured steps. The hum followed him. Not physically, not like a sound you could point to, but it lingered, uneven and persistent, like a question no one had answered yet. As he reached the galley near the cockpit, another tremor passed through the aircraft. Subtle, but this time it carried a sharper edge. A faint flicker rippled across the overhead lights, then steadied. Marina noticed. So did the junior attendant beside her, who stiffened slightly. That didn't feel right. "It's fine," Marina said quickly, more reflex than certainty. "They're handling it," but even as she said it, her eyes drifted toward the cockpit door again. Ethan stopped just short of the exit, not because he was refusing, because he was listening. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing, not in fear, but in focus. The rhythm had changed again. The delay between pulses was shorter now, tighter. Like something was building instead of settling. Still drawing load, he murmured. Marina exhaled sharply. "Sir, you're hearing it now," he said, not looking at her. That struck a nerve. "I said they're handling it," she repeated, stepping closer. "You don't need to." The cockpit door opened abruptly. Captain Renault stepped out again, this time faster, tension visible in every movement. "We've got a fault we can't isolate. Auxiliary bus won't disengage, and something's feeding back into the system." Marina straightened instantly. "Ground engineers? Delayed," he said. "They're tied up on another aircraft. We're trying to run diagnostics, but it's not responding like it should." Ethan's gaze shifted to him. "Feedback loop," he said quietly. "If it's not isolating, you've got a relay stuck or misfiring." Renault paused, just for a fraction of a second, long enough to register the words, but not long enough to trust them. "And you are?" the captain asked, tone clipped. Passenger, Marina answered quickly, stepping in before Ethan could. He was just leaving. Ethan didn't correct her, didn't add anything, just stood there, calm, as if the tension around him belonged to someone else. Renault gave a brief nod, already turning back toward the cockpit. "We'll manage," the door shut again. And just like that, authority sealed itself off. Marina gestured toward the exit. "Go ahead." Ethan stepped forward again, placing one foot onto the threshold leading to the jet bridge. Then, a sharp flicker. The lights dimmed harder this time, followed by a low, strained whine that hadn't been there before. Not loud enough to trigger alarms, not yet, but wrong in a way that made the air feel heavier. The junior attendant inhaled sharply. "Marina, I see it," she said. But her voice had changed, because now she heard it too. That uneven hum wasn't just background noise anymore. It had texture, instability. Like something struggling to hold together beneath layers of systems meant to keep it controlled. Ethan didn't move, still standing at the threshold, still listening. "If that loop spikes," he said, almost under his breath, "you're going to overload the bus." Marina turned sharply. "Stop." But it didn't come out as a command, more like a reaction, because part of her already knew he wasn't guessing. "Sir, you need to leave the aircraft." Now, Ethan glanced down the jet bridge, then back at her. There was no defiance in his expression, just calculation. "My daughter's waiting on the other side of this flight," he said quietly. "I don't have time for delays." Marina blinked, caught off guard by the shift. This isn't about. It is for me," he said, not raising his voice. Every minute matters. Something in the way he said it, steady, grounded, made it harder to dismiss. For a brief moment, the polished authority she carried faltered against something more human. Then she straightened again, pushing it down. "We're not delaying because of you," she said. "We're delaying because of a technical issue that trained professionals are already handling." Ethan nodded slowly. "Right." Another flicker, stronger this time. The hum surged, dipped, then surged again, uneven, unstable, and now unmistakable. From inside the cockpit, a voice snapped through the door. "We're getting voltage spikes, this isn't stabilizing." Marina froze. The junior attendant stepped back instinctively. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, listening. Then he opened them. Calm, certain. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's getting worse." Marina looked at him, really looked this time. Not at the clothes, not at the ticket, at the way he stood, at the way he wasn't panicking, at the way he already seemed to understand something no one else had explained yet. Her voice dropped, just slightly. "What do you think is happening?" Ethan didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't know, because he was deciding whether to say it at all. Then, "Something's feeding power where it shouldn't," he said, "and it's not going to stop on its own." Silence hung between them, thick, uncomfortable. Because if he was right, then waiting wasn't a solution. It was a risk. And for the first time since he boarded, Marina wasn't entirely sure she was in control anymore. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next changes everything about how they see him and how he sees them. Ethan shifted his grip on his bag and slowly stepped back inside the aircraft. Ethan's foot crossed back over the threshold, leaving the jet bridge behind him. The door remained open, but something had shifted. The moment he stepped inside again, it no longer felt like he was just a passenger being processed. It felt like he'd stepped into something unresolved. Marina noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice lower now, less certain than before. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned slightly, eyes moving across the cabin ceiling, tracing the faint flickers that came and went like irregular pulses. The hum was louder now, not in volume, but in presence. It pressed into the silence, impossible to ignore once you truly listened. Ethan set his bag down near the galley wall. "I'll leave," he said calmly. "But not until that stabilizes." Marina crossed her arms, instinctively reclaiming authority. "That's not your decision." Another tremor ran through the aircraft, sharper this time. Both of them felt it. The junior attendant stepped closer to Marina, voice tight. "That's the third fluctuation." Marina didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on Ethan. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, though the conviction behind it had weakened. He gave a slight nod, like he understood why she needed to say that. "Maybe," he replied. "But if that bus keeps cycling like this, it's going to push more load into a system that's already failing." The words landed differently now. Not dismissed outright, not accepted either, just lingering. From the cockpit a sharper sound cut through, metallic, abrupt, followed by a burst of static over the internal comms. "Captain?" Marina called, stepping closer to the door. No immediate response. The hum surged again. This time, the lights didn't just flicker, they dimmed noticeably, then snapped back, like the system was struggling to hold balance. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he murmured, "that's not good." Marina turned back to him. "Stop saying that like you're part of this." He met her gaze evenly. "I'm standing in it, same as you." That unsettled her. Because he wasn't wrong. The line between roles, passenger, crew, authority, was starting to blur under pressure. The cockpit door opened again, more abruptly this time. Captain Renault stepped out, tension fully visible now. Sweat had formed along his brow, and his usual composure was fraying at the edges. "We've got unstable voltage across the auxiliary grid," he said quickly. "Primary shutdown isn't completing, and something's forcing a loop." Marina nodded, trying to keep pace. "Ground engineers?" "Still delayed," he replied. "They're saying 10 more minutes." Ethan let out a quiet breath through his nose. 10 minutes is a long time for a loop like that, he said. Renault's head snapped toward him. There was irritation there now, not just dismissal, something sharper. "And you're still here because—" "Because it's not stabilizing," Ethan answered simply. Marina stepped in again. "He's leaving now." "I was just—" Another surge. This one hit harder. The overhead lights flickered rapidly, and for a split second, a warning chime echoed faintly before cutting out. The junior attendant flinched. That sounded like a system alert. "It didn't fully trigger," Renault said quickly, though his voice carried strain. "It's partial." Ethan shook his head slightly. "Not partial," he said. Suppressed. Silence. Renault stared at him. "Excuse me?" Ethan stepped a little closer, not aggressively, not stepping into authority, just closing distance enough to be heard clearly. "If the system's cycling power unevenly, it might not be registering full faults," he explained. "You're getting symptoms without complete alerts." Marina's gaze flicked between them. For the first time, she didn't interrupt. Didn't shut him down. Because what he said made sense, or at least it sounded like it did. Renault's expression hardened, though uncertainty flickered beneath it. "You're making a lot of assumptions for someone who doesn't belong here," he said. Ethan didn't react to the tone, didn't take offense, just nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I get that." Another pause. Then quieter. "But you're running out of clean cycles." That landed, because Renault knew exactly what that meant. Limited attempts before failure compounded, before something irreversible happened. The hum shifted again, faster now, tighter, like a system straining against its own limits. The air felt different, heavier, charged. Marina swallowed, her composure slipping just slightly. "Captain, should we consider we follow protocol?" Renault cut in, though it sounded more like he was reminding himself than her. Ethan glanced toward the cockpit, then back at them. "Protocol works when systems behave," he said. "This one isn't." Renault stepped forward, closing the gap between them. For a moment, the authority returned fully: uniform, rank, command. "You need to step off this aircraft," he said firmly. Now, Ethan held his gaze, not challenging, not yielding either, just steady. "My daughter's waiting," he said again, quieter this time. "I don't miss that flight." Something in the way he said it cut through the tension differently. Not technical, not procedural, personal, real. Marina felt it. Even Renault hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, another fluctuation. This one came with a sharp electrical crack from somewhere deeper in the aircraft. All three of them turned instinctively. The hum spiked, dipped, then spiked again. Unstable, escalating, no longer subtle. The junior attendant stepped back completely now, fear visible. "That's getting worse." Ethan didn't move, didn't panic. He just listened. Then, under his breath, "Yeah, it's accelerating." Marina looked at him again, but this time, she wasn't seeing a passenger anymore. She was seeing someone who understood what was happening. Before anyone else said it out loud. And that realization changed everything. The realization didn't settle gently. It hit all at once. Marina felt it first, not as understanding, but as a crack in certainty. Everything she had relied on, procedure, hierarchy, control, suddenly felt thinner than it should. And standing right in front of her was someone who didn't fit any of it, yet seemed to understand more than anyone else in the room. The hum surged again. This time it wasn't just a sound. It vibrated through the floor beneath their feet, subtle but undeniable. A low, uneven pulse that traveled up through the structure like something struggling to hold itself together. Captain Renault turned sharply back toward the cockpit. "I need to recheck the bus readings." He stepped inside without waiting, the door swinging shut behind him with a heavier finality than before. Marina remained where she was. So did Ethan. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The junior attendant hovered nearby, her earlier composure replaced by visible tension. Her eyes darted between the ceiling panels and the cockpit door, like she expected something worse to happen at any moment. "Marina," she whispered. "What if?" "It's under control," Marina said quickly. But the words came out too fast, too automatic. Even she heard it. Another flicker. Longer this time. The lights dimmed enough to shift the entire tone of the cabin, shadows stretching across empty seats, turning the space colder, more uncertain. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Voltage is not stabilizing," he said. "It's climbing in bursts." Marina turned to him again, sharper this time, not with dismissal, but with something closer to frustration. "You keep saying that like you're monitoring it. I'm listening to it," he replied. "That's not the same thing." He gave a slight shrug. "Depends on how long you've been around systems like this." That answer lingered, not enough to convince her, but enough to make ignoring him harder. Inside the cockpit, raised voices broke through, muffled, tense. "No, that shouldn't be happening. Try cycling it again. It's not responding." The words weren't clear, but the tone was. And it wasn't confidence. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the door. "They're running the same loop again," he said. Marina frowned. "You can't know that." He didn't argue, didn't need to, because a second later, a sharp click echoed through the aircraft, followed by a rapid series of flickers that rippled from front to back. The hum spiked, then dipped, then surged harder than before. The junior attendant gasped, grabbing the edge of a seat. "That's worse." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. Much worse, Marina's composure slipped, not entirely, but enough. She turned toward the cockpit door, hesitation finally giving way to urgency. Her hand reached for the handle, then paused. Protocol. Authority, line she wasn't supposed to cross, but behind that door they weren't solving it. She knew that now. Ethan watched her, not pushing, not stepping in, just waiting. Because this moment wasn't about him forcing anything, it was about her realizing it. Another surge. Stronger. A faint smell, barely noticeable at first, crept into the air. Warm. Metallic. The kind of scent that didn't belong in a stable system. Ethan's eyes narrowed. There it is, he murmured. Marina froze. What? He didn't look at her. Heat's building somewhere it shouldn't. That hit harder than anything he'd said before. Because even without understanding the technical side, she understood that. And now she could smell it too. Faint, but real. The cockpit door swung open again, this time with force. Renault stepped out, urgency replacing whatever authority he'd been holding on to. It's escalating, he said. We're seeing irregular spikes across multiple channels. If this keeps up, we could... He stopped. Not because he ran out of words. Because he didn't want to say the rest. Ethan finished it for him. Burn out the system, he said. Or worse. Renault's eyes locked onto him. No irritation this time. No dismissal. Just tension. How do you know that? He asked. Ethan met his gaze. Because it's not isolating, he said. It's feeding itself. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Marina felt it settle around them, pressing in from all sides. Because now they were all looking at him, not as an outsider, not as a problem, but as something else. Renault stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. If you're guessing, I'm not, Ethan said. Calm. Certain. No hesitation. And that certainty was harder to ignore than any argument. Another fluctuation. This one came with a sharp, unmistakable crack from deeper within the aircraft, louder than before, followed by a brief dip in power that darkened the cabin for a full second before the lights snapped back on. The junior attendant flinched hard. That sounded like. It's progressing, Ethan said. Renault exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. We've got engineers on the way, he said, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Ethan nodded once. Yeah, he said. But you might not have the time. That landed. Because they all felt it now. The acceleration, the instability, the narrowing window. Marina looked between them, the weight of decision settling squarely on her shoulders. Because if protocol failed, then what? Her eyes returned to Ethan, not scanning him anymore, not judging, seeing, really seeing. The calm, the awareness, the way he wasn't reacting like someone out of his depth. What would you do? She asked. The question hung there. Simple, direct, and for the first time, given without authority. Ethan didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't know, but because he understood what that question meant. It meant trust, or at least the beginning of it. He glanced toward the cockpit, then back at her. You need to stop the loop, he said. Manually. Renault frowned. That's not standard procedure. Ethan gave a small, almost tired nod. Yeah, he said. Neither is this situation. Another surge. Stronger. The hum tightened into something sharper, more aggressive, like a system reaching its limit. And now, there was no pretending anymore. Whatever was happening inside that aircraft, it wasn't under control. Not yet. And maybe, not without him. The words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. You need to stop the loop, manually. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like it wasn't a suggestion. Like it was already the only option left. Captain Renault shook his head almost immediately, instinct kicking back in. We don't bypass systems without full diagnostics. That's not how this works. Ethan didn't argue, didn't push. He simply glanced toward the cockpit again, listening as the hum shifted into something sharper, tighter, more unstable. The flicker overhead responded in uneven bursts, like the aircraft itself was struggling to keep pace with its own failing rhythm. That's exactly how this works when systems stop responding, he said quietly. Marina watched both of them, her mind caught between two worlds, protocol and reality. One told her to wait. The other was getting louder by the second. Another fluctuation rippled through the cabin, stronger than before. The lights dipped hard enough this time that the shadows swallowed entire rows of empty seats before snapping back into place. The junior attendant stepped back again, her voice shaking now. That's not stabilizing, it's getting worse every time. No one corrected her. Because she was right. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if confirming something internally. You've got maybe a few cycles left before it pushes too far, he said. Once it crosses that threshold, you're not shutting it down clean anymore. Renault looked at him again. But this time the resistance wasn't as immediate. And you know that how? He asked, though the edge in his voice had softened. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer to the galley wall, his eyes moving briefly across the panel's seams, like he was mapping something unseen beneath the surface. Then, I've seen systems fail like this before, he said. That was it, no titles, no explanation, just enough truth to hang on. Marina felt the shift again, not complete trust, but something closer to consideration. Another surge. This one came with a sharper electrical snap from deeper inside the aircraft, followed by a faint but unmistakable smell of overheated components. Stronger now, no longer subtle. Renault turned toward the cockpit instinctively, tension snapping back into place. If that's heat buildup, it is, Ethan said. The captain stopped. Because he knew. At this point, denying it wouldn't change anything. Marina took a step forward, her voice lower now. If we don't wait for engineers, Renault didn't respond immediately. He didn't have a clean answer. Because waiting no longer felt like a safe option. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, glancing between them. I'm not telling you to trust me, he said. I'm telling you what's happening. That landed differently. Because it removed the pressure. It wasn't about belief. It was about facts. The hum surged again, louder now, closer to something that couldn't be ignored. Renault let out a slow breath, running a hand over his face. If we attempt a manual override and it goes wrong, it already is going wrong, Ethan replied. Not harsh, not aggressive, just true. Silence followed, heavy, because there was no easy way around that. Marina looked at Ethan again, then at the cockpit, then back. And something in her expression changed, not authority, not doubt, decision. What do you need? She asked. Renault turned to her. Marina, we don't have time, she said, cutting him off, though her voice wasn't sharp, it was steady. You can see that. He hesitated. Just long enough. And that was all it took. Ethan nodded once. Access to the cockpit, he said. And someone to follow instructions exactly. Renault exhaled slowly. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. But nothing about this situation was. Another fluctuation hit, harder. The lights dimmed again, longer this time, and the hum spiked into a strained whine that echoed through the structure. The aircraft was telling them something. And it wasn't subtle anymore. All right, Renault said finally. The word felt heavy, like crossing a line. But you don't touch anything without me saying so. Ethan gave a small nod. Fair. Marina stepped aside, clearing the path toward the cockpit. And just like that, the roles shifted. Not completely, but enough. Ethan picked up his bag, setting it gently against the galley wall before moving forward. His movements were calm, controlled, like he'd already stepped into a space he understood. As he passed Marina, she spoke again, quieter this time. If this goes wrong, he paused for half a second, then glanced at her. It won't, he said. Not confidence. Not arrogance. Certainty. And that certainty was beginning to feel like the only stable thing left in the aircraft. Before he stepped fully inside, his hand brushed briefly against his bag, just enough to steady it, just enough to remind himself why he couldn't afford hesitation. Then he entered the cockpit. The confined space was filled with tension. Panels flickered, indicators fluctuated. The hum was louder here, closer, sharper, impossible to ignore. Renault moved beside him, still holding on to control, but no longer alone in it. "Show me," the captain said. Ethan's eyes scanned the systems quickly. Not rushed. Focused. Like he was reading something familiar beneath unfamiliar layers. "Loops feeding through auxiliary relay," he said. "You're not isolating because it's stuck in cycle." Renault frowned. "That's not." Another spike cut him off. Sharp, unstable. Ethan pointed. "There," he said. "You see that delay? That's your misfire." Renault followed his gaze, and for the first time, he saw it. The hesitation, the inconsistency, something he'd missed before. Something small, but critical. "How did I not catch that?" he muttered. Ethan didn't answer. Because it didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. "Manual override," Ethan said. "We cut the loop ourselves." Renault swallowed. Because now, it wasn't theory anymore. It was action. And the next move would decide everything. Before we go further, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next isn't just a fix, it's a moment that changes how everyone in that cockpit sees him forever. The cockpit felt smaller now, not physically but in pressure. Every sound carried weight. Every flicker meant something. The hum wasn't just noise anymore, it was a countdown. Renault stared at the panel where Ethan had pointed. The delay was there. Subtle, but undeniable once you saw it. That relay shouldn't lag like that, the captain muttered. Ethan shook his head slightly. It's not lagging, it's stuck in a partial cycle. Another surge hit. The instruments flickered in uneven bursts, numbers shifting faster than they should. A warning tone tried to trigger again, cutting in, then out, like the system couldn't decide whether to sound the alarm or suppress it. Marina stood just behind them now, one hand braced lightly against the doorway. She wasn't trained for this space, not like they were, but she wasn't leaving either. "What happens if that cycle completes?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't turn. "It won't complete clean," he said. "It'll spike, and when it does, it'll dump more load than the system can handle." Renault exhaled slowly. "Which means heat," Ethan said. "Too much, too fast." The faint metallic scent in the air thickened, as if confirming every word. For a second, no one spoke. Because now, they all understood. This wasn't just a malfunction, it was a failure in motion. And it wasn't slowing down. Ethan stepped closer to the panel, his gaze locking onto the auxiliary controls. His fingers hovered just above the switches, not touching, just mapping. "You've been trying to shut it down through the system," he said. "But the system's part of the problem." Renault nodded slowly. "So we bypass it?" "Exactly." Another flicker. Stronger. The cockpit dimmed, then surged back to life, the hum tightening into a sharper, almost aggressive whine. Marina swallowed. "That doesn't sound stable, it's not," Ethan replied. Renault glanced at him. "Manual override isn't designed for this kind of failure." Ethan gave a small, almost knowing nod. "Yeah." "But it's still your best shot," the captain hesitated, not because he didn't believe him, Because this was the point where belief turned into risk. If we get this wrong, Renault started. Ethan cut in, calm but firm. You won't. That confidence, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from experience, and for the first time, Renault felt it. Not as arrogance, as something earned. Another surge. This one hit harder. The lights dimmed long enough to cast the cockpit into near darkness before snapping back. The instruments flickered wildly for a second, then struggled to stabilize. The hum spiked, sharp, strained, unstable. Marina flinched. That's worse. We're out of time, Ethan said. No hesitation now. No room for debate. Renault nodded once. Decision made. All right, he said. Talk me through it. Ethan stepped fully into position beside him, his posture shifting subtly, not into authority but into familiarity, like he'd been here before. Not this exact cockpit, but something close enough. First, he said, you need to isolate the auxiliary relay manually, not through the system, physically override it. Renault's eyes moved across the panel. That'll cut part of the power feed. Yeah, Ethan said. That's the point. Another flicker. The hum surged again, tighter now, like something pushing toward its limit. Once you isolate it, Ethan continued, you're going to see a spike. That's normal. Don't react to it. Marina frowned. A spike is normal? In this situation, Ethan said, it's expected. Renault's hand hovered over the controls, and if it doesn't stabilize, Ethan didn't hesitate. Then we go to secondary cutoff, he said. But it won't come to that. The certainty was back, steady, unshaken. Renault glanced at him once more. Then he moved. His fingers wrapped around the manual override switch, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before engaging it. Click. The response was immediate. The hum spiked sharply, louder than before, the entire aircraft vibrating with the sudden shift. The lights dimmed hard, almost completely, before flickering back in uneven pulses. Marina grabbed the doorframe. That's not. Hold, Ethan said. Not loud, not forceful. But it cut through everything. Renault froze, resisting the instinct to react. The instruments fluctuated wildly for a moment, numbers jumping, systems struggling to recalibrate under the sudden change. Then, a shift, subtle at first. The hum dropped, just slightly. Not gone, but different. Ethan leaned in, eyes focused. You see that? Renault nodded slowly. It's leveling. Not yet, Ethan said, but it's trying. Another fluctuation. Smaller this time, then another, each one less violent than before. The system wasn't stable, but it was responding. Marina's grip on the doorway loosened slightly. Is that good? Ethan exhaled. For now, he said, but his eyes didn't leave the panel, because he knew they weren't done yet, not even close. Renault glanced at him. What's next? Ethan's gaze shifted to another section of the controls. The loop's broken, he said. Now we need to make sure it doesn't rebuild. Another flicker. Faint this time. The hum, softer. But still there. Still present. Still dangerous. Ethan straightened slightly. Now, he said, we finish it, and for the first time since this started, it didn't sound like a possibility. It sounded like a plan. The cockpit no longer felt like it was spiraling, but it wasn't safe either. The violent surges had softened into uneven pulses like the aircraft was catching its breath, but struggling to keep it. The hum still lingered beneath everything, quieter now, but sharper, more deliberate. Ethan didn't relax, didn't step back. Because he knew this part was just as dangerous as the escalation. Don't assume it's done, he said, eyes fixed on the panel. It's not. Renault nodded, his earlier resistance gone, replaced with focused attention. What are we looking for? Ethan pointed toward a cluster of indicators still fluctuating in small, irregular patterns. That, he said, residual cycling. Marina leaned slightly into the cockpit, her voice cautious. You stopped the loop, didn't you? We interrupted it, Ethan corrected. But if anything's still feeding into the system, it can rebuild. That word, rebuild, hung heavy. Because it meant this wasn't just something that happened, it was something that could come back. Another faint flicker passed overhead, not as aggressive, but enough. Renault exhaled slowly. So what's feeding it now? Ethan's eyes moved quickly across the panel, scanning, processing. His focus narrowed, not frantic, not rushed, just precise. You've got a secondary line still carrying load, he said. It's weaker, but it's enough. Renault followed his gaze. That shouldn't even be active right now. Ethan gave a small nod. Yeah, that's the problem. Marina felt that same shift again, the one that had been building since he stepped back inside. The realization that this man wasn't guessing, wasn't lucky. He understood this, on a level that made trained professionals pause. Another subtle vibration ran through the floor, not violent, but persistent. Ethan tilted his head slightly, listening again. It's stabilizing, but not clean, he said. You're still carrying uneven load. Renault frowned. If we cut that secondary line, you might drop too much at once, Ethan finished. Yeah. The captain ran a hand over his face, tension still present but more focused now, so we can't cut it directly. No, Ethan said. You balance it first. Marina blinked. Balance it how? Ethan finally stepped back half a pace, giving himself just enough space to see the full panel layout. Redirect the load, he said. Shift it to a stable channel before cutting the unstable one. Renault hesitated. That's not standard procedure. Ethan gave him a brief look. Neither is anything we've done so far. That landed, again. Because it was true. The rules they relied on had already failed. This, whatever this was different. Another flicker, fainter now. But still present. The system wasn't collapsing anymore. But it wasn't fixed either. It was hanging. Waiting. Renault straightened slightly, his posture shifting, not into command, but into cooperation. All right, he said. Walk me through it. Ethan nodded once. Start with the load distribution panel, he said. You're going to reroute part of that secondary feed. Renault's hands moved into position, more confident now, but still cautious. Which channel? Ethan leaned in slightly, pointing. That one. It's stable. It can take the extra load. Marina watched closely, her earlier authority replaced by something quieter. Respect, not fully spoken, but forming. The junior attendant stood just behind her now, silent, eyes wide, taking in everything. Because this wasn't normal. This wasn't how things were supposed to work, and yet it was working. Another small fluctuation passed through the system, barely noticeable, but Ethan caught it. Easy, he said. Don't rush it. Renault adjusted carefully, following each instruction with precision. The panel responded, slowly, deliberately. Numbers shifted, not wildly this time, but steadily, like something being guided instead of forced. It's taking the load, Renault said, a hint of relief creeping into his voice. Ethan nodded. Good. Hold it there. For a moment, everything felt balanced. Not perfect, not stable enough to trust, but controlled. And that control was something they hadn't had since this started. Marina exhaled quietly, her shoulders lowering just slightly. So once that's stable, we cut the secondary, Ethan said. Renault glanced at him. And that finishes it? Ethan paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then, it should. Not certainty this time, not absolute, but honest, and somehow, that felt more trustworthy. Another faint hum passed through the system, still there, still present, but weaker, like something losing strength. Renault's hand hovered over the next control. All right, he said. On your mark. Ethan watched the panel closely, every indicator, every shift, every subtle movement, because timing was everything now. Wait, he said, a beat, another. The system steadied just a fraction more. Now, Renault moved, click. The response came instantly. The hum dipped, not violently, not sharply, but decisively. The lights steadied, no flicker, no surge, just consistency. Marina blinked. Did it? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He watched, waited, listened. A second passed, then another. The hum faded. Not completely, but enough to feel the difference. Renault exhaled slowly, tension draining from his posture. It's stabilizing. Ethan finally nodded. Yeah, he said quietly, and for the first time, the aircraft felt like it wasn't fighting itself anymore. Not yet safe, not fully resolved, but closer, much closer. And standing there, in that cockpit, everyone knew one thing for certain. They wouldn't have gotten this far. Without him, the cockpit held stillness for the first time since the chaos began. Not silence, never silence, but a controlled quiet. The kind that came after something volatile had been forced back into place. The lights above no longer flickered. The instruments no longer jumped unpredictably. The hum had softened into something steady, almost normal. Almost. Ethan didn't move away, didn't step back into relief like the others, because he knew better. Don't relax yet, he said, eyes still scanning. It's stable, but not secured. Renault nodded slowly, his breathing finally evening out. You think it could spike again? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He leaned slightly closer to the panel, studying a cluster of readings that were no longer chaotic, but still imperfect. Tiny inconsistencies, minor fluctuations that most would ignore. But not him. If there's any residual imbalance, he said, it can rebuild over time. Marina stepped a little closer into the cockpit, her voice quieter now, no edge left in it. So we're not done. No, Ethan replied. We're just past the worst part. That alone changed the air. Past the worst. Not finished, not safe, just no longer on the edge of failure. The junior attendant exhaled shakily behind them. It feels normal again. Ethan glanced back briefly. It feels better, he corrected. That's not the same thing. Renault's hand hovered near the controls again. What do we need to do to lock it down? Ethan straightened slightly, his posture shifting from reactive to deliberate. Now we make sure nothing feeds back into the system, he said. Clean stabilization, no shortcuts. Another brief pause. Not tension this time. Focus. The kind that came after survival, when the real work began. Marina folded her arms lightly, watching him now with a completely different expression than before. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan met her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the panel. Something like it, he said. That was all. But it was enough, because it confirmed what they were already starting to understand. This wasn't luck, this wasn't instinct, this was experience. Renault followed Ethan's line of sight again. What's the next step? Ethan pointed toward a secondary control section, less active now but still carrying traces of load. We need to fully isolate the system, he said. Not just interrupt the loop, lock it out. Renault frowned slightly. If we isolate everything, we lose redundancy. Ethan nodded. Yeah. Temporarily. Marina tilted her head. And that's safe? Ethan gave a small shrug. Safer than letting it rebuild. That answer didn't come with comfort. But it came with truth. And at this point, truth was more valuable than reassurance. Another second passed. The system held steady. No flickers, no surges, just a quiet, controlled hum. Renault exhaled again, longer this time. All right. Walk me through it. Ethan stepped closer once more. Start by locking out that channel, he said. Then we isolate the feed completely. Renault's hands moved carefully, following each instruction with precision. Click. The response was subtle. A slight shift in the readings. Nothing dramatic, but enough to matter. It's holding, Renault said. Ethan nodded. Good. Now don't rush the next part. Marina watched closely, her earlier authority replaced by something quieter. Understanding, not just of the situation, but of him. Because the man she had tried to remove from this aircraft was now the only reason it hadn't failed. The thought settled heavily, not as guilt, not yet, but as awareness. Ethan continued, his voice steady, controlled. Next step, cut the residual feed. Renault hesitated for half a second. If we do that, there's no buffer. Ethan met his gaze. You don't need one anymore. That certainty returned again. Not loud, not forceful, but absolute. And this time, Renault trusted it. His hand moved. Click. The panel responded, a slight dip, then stabilization. Clean, even. For the first time since this started, perfectly balanced. The hum softened further. No strain, no edge, just normal operation. Marina blinked slowly. That's it? She asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He watched, listened, waited, a second, 2, 3. Nothing changed, no flicker, no surge, no instability. Finally, he stepped back. Yeah, he said quietly. That's it. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Because everyone in that cockpit understood what they meant. It was over. Renault leaned back slightly, tension finally releasing from his shoulders. We were minutes away from losing control of that system, he said. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. They all knew. Marina let out a slow breath, her arms lowering at her sides. For a moment, no one spoke. Because there wasn't anything left to say. The crisis had passed. But something else remained. Something quieter. Something deeper. Perspective. Before we move forward, make sure you're subscribed. Because what happens after this moment isn't about the system. It's about how quickly people change when they realize who they've been standing in front of. Ethan turned slightly, glancing toward the cabin beyond the cockpit. Toward the exit. Toward the path he had been about to take before everything changed. His bag still rested where he left it, and somewhere beyond this aircraft, his daughter was still waiting. He exhaled quietly, then stepped away from the controls, not like someone claiming victory, just someone ready to leave. But as he moved, Marina spoke again. Wait. He paused, not surprised, just still, because something told him this wasn't over, not completely. Ethan stopped mid-step, not turning immediately, just pausing, like he already knew something needed to be said. Behind him, the cockpit no longer carried urgency, but it wasn't empty either. The weight of what had just happened lingered in the air, quiet but undeniable. Wait. Marina's voice wasn't sharp this time. It didn't carry authority. It carried something else. He turned slowly, not defensive, not impatient, just present. She stepped forward slightly, no longer standing at a distance, no longer holding the same posture she had before. For a moment, she didn't speak. And that alone said more than anything. Because this was the first time she wasn't sure how to begin. She started, then stopped. Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence. He let it sit. Let her find the words. You knew what you were doing the whole time, she said finally. It wasn't an accusation. It was realization. Ethan gave a small shrug, enough to know it wasn't right. That answer didn't fully satisfy her. But it wasn't meant to, because it wasn't about proving anything anymore. Renault stepped out of the cockpit behind them, his expression calmer now, but far more focused than before. The strain had faded, replaced by something closer to respect. We've got full system stability, he said, No residual spikes, no feedback loops, it's clean. Marina nodded slowly. Then looked back at Ethan. And you didn't say anything when we asked you to leave. Ethan glanced toward the cabin briefly, then back at her. I did, he said. Just not in a way you wanted to hear. That landed. Because it was true. She had heard him. She just hadn't listened. Another quiet moment passed. The junior attendant shifted slightly behind Marina, her voice soft. You saved the aircraft, didn't you? Ethan exhaled through his nose. Wouldn't go that far, he said. Just stopped it from getting worse, but no one else downplayed it. Because they had seen it, felt it, the shift from chaos to control. And who had made it happen? Renault stepped closer, crossing the space that had once separated them. You weren't guessing, he said. Again, not a question. Ethan shook his head once. No, Renault studied him for a moment. Then, what's your background? There it was. The question that had been building since the moment he stepped back inside. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes drifted briefly toward the floor, then toward the galley where his bag still rested, toward something beyond the aircraft. Then back. Used to work systems like this, he said. Renault frowned slightly. Used to? How? Ethan met his gaze. Air Force, he said simply. Avionics. Silence, not loud, not dramatic, just still. Because everything clicked into place at once. The calm, the precision, the certainty. It hadn't been instinct. It had been training. Experience. Years of it. Marina felt it hit her harder than the others. Because suddenly every moment from earlier replayed in her mind. The way she looked at him. The way she spoke to him. The assumptions. All of it. And standing in front of her now wasn't just a passenger. Was someone who had known exactly what he was doing. While she tried to remove him from the aircraft, her voice softened, almost unconsciously. You should have told us. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. Would it have made a difference? She didn't answer. Because she knew. It probably wouldn't have. Not at first. Renault exhaled slowly, running a hand along the back of his neck. We were minutes away from a serious failure, he said, and you walked in like you'd seen it before. Ethan shrugged again. Something like that. The captain nodded once, the respect no longer subtle. Thank you. Simple. Direct. Earned. Ethan acknowledged it with a slight nod, nothing more. Because for him, this wasn't about recognition. It never had been. He turned slightly, his attention already shifting back toward the cabin, toward the exit, toward what mattered. My flight, he said. Is it still moving? Renault blinked, almost caught off guard by the shift. We'll make sure it does, he said. After this, you're not missing anything. Ethan nodded. Good. He stepped past them, moving back into the cabin. The space felt different now. Not empty, not tense, just quiet, resolved. His bag sat exactly where he left it. He picked it up, adjusting the strap over his shoulder. As he did, the small photo slipped slightly into view again. A young girl. Smiling. Waiting. Marina noticed. Of course she did. And something in her expression changed again. Your daughter? She asked softly. Ethan glanced down at the photo, then back at her. Yeah, that's why you couldn't wait, she said. He nodded once. Yeah, no elaboration. No need, because now she understood. Not just what he did, but why, and somehow that made it matter even more. Ethan turned toward the exit again, ready this time, no hesitation, no interruption. But as he reached the doorway, Marina spoke one last time. Sir. He paused just slightly. She took a step forward, her voice steady, but different now. Not authoritative, not distant. Human. Thank you. Ethan didn't turn fully, just enough to acknowledge her. Then he nodded and stepped forward. out of the aircraft, leaving behind a crew that would never see a passenger the same way again. The moment Ethan stepped onto the jet bridge, the air felt different, quieter, simpler, like the tension he had just left behind didn't exist out here, but it hadn't followed him, because for him it never had. He walked steadily down the narrow corridor, the hum of the aircraft fading behind him, replaced by the distant sounds of the terminal, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, the quiet rhythm of people moving through their own lives. Normal. That's all he wanted. No recognition, no attention. Just forward. Behind him, though, things weren't normal. Marina stood at the aircraft doorway longer than she expected, watching. Not because she needed to. Because something in her wouldn't let her turn away just yet. "He just left," the junior attendant said softly beside her. Marina nodded, her eyes still fixed down the jet bridge. "Yeah," she replied. But it didn't feel complete. Not yet. Because something about that moment, about him, didn't sit right with how it ended. Inside the cockpit, Renault stepped out again, his movements slower now, more grounded. "Ground control's already asking what happened," he said. They saw the fluctuations from their side. Marina glanced back briefly. "What did you tell them?" "The truth," he said. "That we had help." Her gaze returned to the jet bridge. "You didn't say from who?" Renault shook his head slightly. "No," he said. Didn't seem like he'd want that, that was true. Everything about Ethan had made that clear. He didn't step in for recognition, he stepped in because something needed to be done. Still, Marina exhaled slowly. "That's not right," she said. Renault raised an eyebrow. "What isn't?" "We let him walk away like none of that mattered." Renault studied her for a moment, then nodded once. It mattered. She didn't respond, because she knew that wasn't what she meant, not entirely. Another second passed. Then Marina moved, quickly, decisively. "I'll be back," she said, already stepping toward the exit. Renault started, but she didn't stop, because this was something she needed to fix, not for protocol, not for procedure, for herself. The jet bridge stretched ahead, narrow and quiet. Ethan was already halfway down, walking with the same steady pace, his bag resting against his shoulder like nothing unusual had just happened. "Wait," her voice carried down the corridor. He slowed, then stopped. Not surprised, just waiting. Marina caught up quickly, her breath slightly uneven, not from the distance but from everything she hadn't said yet. For a moment she didn't speak, didn't know how to start, because this wasn't her world. Not this part. Not the part where authority didn't lead. "I shouldn't have treated you like that," she said finally. The words came out direct, unpolished, honest. Ethan looked at her. Not judging. Not dismissing. Just listening. "You were right," she continued. "And I didn't even consider it. I saw," she paused, searching for the right words, "what I expected to see." He gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said, "no edge, no bitterness, just acknowledgement." That somehow made it harder. "I was wrong," she said. That part wasn't easy for her, but she said it anyway. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, adjusting the strap of his bag. "It happens," he replied. "Simple, no weight behind it, no need to make it bigger than it was." But Marina shook her head. "No," she said, "it doesn't, not like that." He didn't argue. Didn't agree either. He just let her say what she needed to say. "I judged you before I even spoke to you," she added, "and if you hadn't stayed—" Her voice trailed off. Because she didn't need to finish that sentence. They both knew how it ended. Ethan glanced back briefly toward the aircraft, then forward again. "I stayed because something needed fixing," he said. "Not because of how you treated me, that mattered, more than she expected. Because it separated the two things, the mistake and the outcome. "Still, I'm sorry," she said again. This time quieter, more grounded. Ethan studied her for a moment, then gave a slight nod. "All right," he said, and just like that, he accepted it. No conditions, no lecture, no reminder, just acceptance. Marina exhaled slowly, some of the weight lifting from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said. He nodded again, then turned slightly, ready to move forward. But before he did, she spoke one more time. "Your daughter." He paused, not turning fully, just enough. "I hope you make it to her on time," she said. Ethan's expression softened, not visibly, but enough. "Yeah," he said quietly, "me too." And then he continued walking, down the jet bridge, toward the terminal, toward everything that mattered beyond this moment. Marina stood there for a few seconds longer, watching him disappear into the flow of people. Not as a passenger, not as a problem, but as someone she would never forget. Behind her, the aircraft waited, stable, silent, safe, because of someone who was never supposed to matter. And that realization stayed with her, long after he was gone. By the time Ethan stepped into the terminal, the world had already moved on. People rushed past him, dragging luggage, checking phones, scanning departure boards that flickered with delays and updates. No one knew what had just happened a few meters behind those secured doors. No one knew how close that aircraft had come to failure. And no one knew that the quiet man walking through the crowd had been the difference. He preferred it that way. He adjusted the strap of his bag and moved with purpose, eyes scanning for the next gate. Every second still mattered. The clock hadn't stopped just because the crisis had ended. His daughter was still waiting. And that was the only thing that truly mattered. Behind him, however, the story wasn't over. Inside the aircraft, Captain Renault stood near the cockpit, now speaking into his headset with a calm that hadn't been there earlier. "Yes," he said, "system is fully stabilized." Manual intervention resolved the issue. No, not ground crew. It was. He paused, not because he didn't know what to say, but because the answer didn't fit the system he was reporting to. It was handled internally, he finished. Across from him, Marina stood still, arms no longer crossed, posture no longer rigid. She wasn't focused on procedure anymore, she was thinking, replaying everything, the way she had looked at him, the way she had spoken, the assumptions she didn't even realize she was making, the contrast between who she thought he was and who he actually was. It unsettled her, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, lasting way, the kind that stayed long after the moment passed. The junior attendant stepped closer, her voice low. "I've never seen anything like that." Marina nodded slightly. "Neither have I," she said. Renault ended the call and removed his headset, exhaling as he leaned lightly against the panel. "They're sending a full inspection team anyway," he said. "Standard procedure." Marina gave a faint nod, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "He didn't even hesitate," she said. Renault glanced at her. No, he just knew. Renault's expression shifted slightly. "People like that usually do," he said. There was no arrogance in his tone, just respect, the kind that came after witnessing something undeniable. Marina looked toward the open cabin. Empty seats. Stillness. A space that had held tension not long ago. "I almost had him removed," she said quietly. Renault didn't respond right away, because there wasn't an easy answer to that. "You didn't know," he said finally. Marina shook her head. "That's the problem," she replied. "I didn't try to. That was the difference." And now, she understood it. Back in the terminal, Ethan reached his gate just as the boarding announcement echoed overhead. Final call for passengers on Flight 482, he exhaled under his breath. Perfect timing, no delay, no missed connection, just enough. He stepped forward, handing over his ticket without hesitation. The attendant scanned it quickly, barely glancing up. "All set," she said. And that was it. No questions, no judgment, no second look. He moved down the next jet bridge, blending into a line of passengers who had no idea what he had just walked away from. And he didn't need them to. Because his story wasn't about them. It never was. As he found his seat on the next flight, he settled in quietly, placing his bag beneath the seat in front of him. The photo slipped into view again. That same small smile. That same reminder. He reached down, adjusting it carefully before tucking it back inside. His hand lingered there for a moment. Then withdrew. The aircraft began its boarding process around him, the normal rhythm of travel resuming as if nothing unusual had happened that night. Engines would start, systems would run, everything would function exactly as expected, because someone had made sure of it, not for recognition, not for reward, but because it needed to be done. Back at the original aircraft, Marina stood at the doorway one last time before stepping out. She glanced once more at the space where he had stood, where she had judged him, where everything had changed. And quietly, without anyone asking her to, she made a decision. From that moment on, she would never look at someone and assume she already knew their worth. Because sometimes the person you're ready to dismiss is the one holding everything together. The second aircraft lifted off smoothly into the night. No flickers, no instability, just the steady, controlled rise of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Ethan sat quietly by the window, watching the runway lights stretch into thin glowing lines beneath him before disappearing completely. The hum of the engines surrounded him now, but this time it was right, balanced, predictable, safe. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for just a moment, not to rest, to breathe. Because for the first time that night, everything was finally moving in the direction it was supposed to. Beside him, passengers scrolled through their phones, adjusted their seats, or stared blankly ahead. No one noticed the man who had just prevented something they would never even hear about. And that was fine. He didn't need them to. His hand moved down to his bag again, fingers brushing lightly against the fabric before pulling the zipper open just enough. The photo was still there, unchanged. His daughter's smile looked back at him, full of trust, full of expectation. Waiting. "I'm on my way," he murmured under his breath, a promise, one he had no intention of breaking. Hours later, when the plane touched down and the doors opened, he didn't rush, but he didn't waste time either. He moved with purpose through the terminal, past signs and voices and crowds that blurred together into background noise, because he already knew where he was going, and who he was going to. At the end of the terminal, near a quiet seating area, she stood, small, wrapped in a light jacket that looked slightly too big for her, but smiling the second she saw him. "Dad." Her voice cut through everything, clear, bright, real. Ethan's pace broke for the first time, not into panic, into relief. He dropped his bag just enough to catch her as she ran into him, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. "Hey, kid," he said softly. She wrapped her arms around his neck tightly, holding on like she didn't want to let go. "You made it," she said. He nodded against her shoulder. "Yeah," he replied. "Told you I would." And that was it. No mention of the aircraft, no mention of what almost happened, because none of that mattered here, not compared to this moment. Behind them, life continued like it always did. People passed. Flights arrived. Announcements echoed. But for him, everything had already aligned. He had made it. And somewhere, miles behind them, a crew stood on a quiet aircraft that would never forget the man they almost turned away. Marina, back at her post, watched the next group of passengers board. Different faces, different stories, But now, she looked at each one just a little longer, not judging, not assuming, just seeing. Because she had learned something that night. Something no training manual had ever taught her. Value doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't ask for permission to matter. Sometimes, it just shows up quietly. And changes everything. So if there's a story you want me to tell next, drop the title below, subscribe, and don't miss our next story, The Janitor They Mocked Fixed the CEO's $1 million Mistake Overnight. Trust me. You'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?